The Hollywood 10 were a group of people who refused to talk about their government affiliation. One day, the House of Un-American Activities Committee, also known as HUAC, started to investigate Hollywood and their influence in the media. There was a rise of alleged communist influence in the American motion picture business, and the U.S. House of Representatives ordered HUAC to go and investigate it. The House of Representatives were concerned that the movie industry could serve as a source of subversive propaganda. Although many of the popular Hollywood films of the 1930s and 1940s offered little evidence of an overriding socialist agenda, the investigation proceeded. In October 1947, more than 40 people with connections to the movie industry received a citation to appear before HUAC on suspicion of holding communist loyalties or being involved in subversive activities. Aware that their answers could ruin their reputations and careers, most individuals either sought leniency by cooperating with investigators or cited their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. A group of 10 Hollywood screenwriters and directors took a different approach and openly challenged the legitimacy of the committee's investigations. The 10 individuals who defied HUAC were Alva Bessie, Herbert Biberman, Lester Cole, Edward Dmytryk, Ring Lardner Jr., John Howard Lawson, Albert Maltz, Samuel Ornitz, Robert Adrian Scott, and Dalton Trumbo. These 10 individuals were screenwriters, directors, and many other occupations within the film industry. They refused to cooperate with the investigation and denounced the HUAC anti-communist hearings as an outrageous violation of their civil rights as the First and Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. This gave them the right to belong to any political organizations that they chose. The First Amendment being the right to freedom of speech, and the Fifth Amendment having protection from self-incrimination. Some compared the committee's coercive methods and intimidating tactics to the repressive measures enacted in Nazi Germany. "I am not on trial here," declared screenwriter Lawson. "This committee is on trial." In November 1947, they were cited for contempt of Congress. Facing trial on that charge in April 1948, each man was found guilty and sentenced to spend a year in prison and pay a $1,000 fine. They were unsuccessful in appealing their verdicts and began serving in 1950. After being released from prison, most were never again employed in Hollywood, but some did write scripts under pseudonyms meaning a different or fake name. This was because these men were blacklisted, a blacklist meaning a list of people that are said to be unacceptable or untrustworthy and should be excluded and avoided from society. The blacklist functioned in part officially as shown by the joint public announcement of the motion picture firms in November 1947 that henceforth no studio would knowingly employ any member of the Communist Party or the members of any other group which advocated the overthrow of the United States government by revolution. The blacklist also occurred unofficially through instruments such as the irresponsible red-baiting newsletter Red Channels, which named whole swaths of people as submersives. Then in the 1960s, the blacklist got reprimanded. Each individual in the Hollywood 10 lived a different life after prison. When Alva Bessie was released from prison in 1951, he had difficulty in finding employment and was not interested in writing for Hollywood under a different name. So therefore, he decided to work as a publicist, a reviewer of books and movies, a lighting technician at a nightclub in San Francisco, and a novelist. Herbert Biberman was forced to finance his own work. In 1954, he worked on a film called Salt of the Earth that was banned from the U.S. and did very well in other countries like New Mexico, Europe, France, and Czechoslovakia. When the blacklist was lifted, Biberman was able to write and direct a screenplay called Slaves, which was an adaptation to Uncle Tom's Cabin. After prison, Lester Cole worked in various jobs like being a short-order cook, waiter, and manual labor. He moved to London in 1961 and tried to write plays, but had very little success. He then returned to the United States to live in San Francisco. In 1965, Lester Cole helped write the screenplay Born Free under a pseudonym. Edward Dmytryk took a different route in his conviction. In 1951, he served several months in prison for contempt of Congress and then made the controversial decision to cooperate with HUAC. He became the only member of the Hollywood 10 to do so. Dmytryk admitted that he had been a member of the American Communist Party, and he gave HUAC the names of 20 more of his colleagues. Thereafter, he was allowed to return to Hollywood. Ring Lardner Jr. believed that there wasn't much hope for him to continue in the film industry, but in 1970, he forcefully re-established himself with an Oscar for Best Screenplay for MASH, which is based on Richard Hooker's novel about a disrespectful Army medical unit during the Korean War. He found it especially difficult to get work in Hollywood under his own name. John Howard Lawson was extremely affected by the blacklist. It shattered his career. Lawson was quoted saying, "I'm much more completely blacklisted than the others. I'm much more notorious, and I'm very proud of that. It had much to do with the fact that I helped to organize the Guild and played a leading role in progressive activities until 1947. After leaving federal prison, Albert Maltz lived in Mexico from 1952 to 1962, writing several American films under pseudonyms. By 1964, the blacklist was said to have been discontinued. His most recent screen work included Two Mules for Sister Sarah, and his wife, Esther Maltz, said that after recovering from a stroke last July, in 1971, he worked diligently under his death to finish a novel. Bel Canto, about the French resistance movement during World War II, was one of the novels that he finished. Samuel Ornitz continued to write stories. In 1951, Mr. Ornitz's novel Bride of the Sabbath was published. The story was called a triumphant achievement by a Times reviewer. Dalton Trumbo is one of the most recognized members of the Hollywood 10. Trumbo went under the name of Robert Rich and won an Academy Award for the Best Screenplay for The Brave One in 1956. The blacklist disappeared by the early 1960s, and Trumbo and Lardner eventually wrote screenplays under their own names. Overall, each individual in the Hollywood 10 was affected differently because of their refusal to say whether or not they were a part of the Communist Party. Each one of them struggled with their identity and purpose in life.